Over the holidays, I got to see a stage adaptation of A Christmas Carol. As a matter of fact, I read that like within 20 miles of here, there were 4 different how many of us saw a stage adaptation of A Christmas Carol? Okay, well, there were a lot of them. And I went to see one. And there you've got the Cratchit family, and they're impoverished, and they buy this scrawny little goose, and it's like the Tiny Tim of geese. And they bring it home, and Bob, he says like, this is the most magnificent goose. But everybody's really depressed about it because it's a Charles Dickens story. And then, at the end of the story, Ebenezer Scrooge has this major change of heart which manifests itself in his decree that he's going to get them the biggest goose in London, which means a death sentence to this goose. And so they do it, and he shows up, and he's got this giant goose, and then it's like, wait, what happened to that little goose that they bought? Like the little goose that could. I was really pulling for that goose. And what, did it end up in the ash heap? Like, what do they do with it? The treatment of geese in that book, and frankly, there's just no other word. It is Dickensian. The bountiful goose is one of the oldest known religious symbols. Like, if you added up everything, the whole history of Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, you added all that together and you double it. And that's how far back we find prehistoric imagery of the goose. And often the shape of a bird is combined with the shape of an abundant, fertile, sometimes pregnant woman. There are many surviving Stone Age examples of this, including a statue of a hybrid goose goddess from around 16,000 years ago that was found in the Ukraine. Some anthropologists suggest that these statues are not goddesses, but may represent the psychedelic shamaness on a hallucinatory flight of fancy. And that explanation is fine, but it doesn't explain, there's that old joke where the guy goes to see the psychiatrist and says, "Doc, my brother's insane, he thinks he's a chicken." And the doctor says, "Well, send him in at once." And the guy says, "Yeah, but who can afford the price of eggs?" Anyway, the shape-shifting shamanist hypothesis fails to explain the eggs, another ancient symbol. The goddess's avian avatar laying the egg from which all of creation hatches. In Europe, the popularity of the bird goddess seems to have reached its peak in what we call the Chalcolithic period, around 7,000 years ago. It's very difficult to study the Chalcolithic era. For one thing, there are no surviving texts. For another, every time I read the word Chalcolithic, my brain registers the word as chocoholic. And then I wonder if the texts from that era were cuneiform etchings on Hershey bars. But even without surviving text, the symbolism of the goddess as waterfowl can be read in numerous ways. For one thing, the duck or goose is a creature who can traverse the realms of land, water, and air. It seems to live on the border between the living world and the dark, watery underworld. It can dive down for seemingly impossible lengths of time and emerge from the primeval muck untarnished, and then take to the air. In the days before houses and buildings, the sight of migratory birds flying south was a sign that it was time for humans also to seek warmer climates for the winter months. We can forget, although we remember every year at around this time, that the human is naturally a migratory species. Now, these days, not many of us can afford to own land in both New York and Florida, but those lucky few are still called snowbirds. The goose is also a symbol of plenty. The egg looks dead as a stone, But inside, there is this golden well of protein. And for primitive foragers who didn't have all of their teeth, a raw egg was a full day's worth of food that you didn't even have to chew. The goose of plenty was one symbol of the prehistoric goddess. Another symbol was the predatory owl, the nocturnal hunter, a reminder that all who live are stalked by death. Together, the owl and the waterfowl represent a spectrum of the ancient goddess, from nativity to fertility to mortality, the turning points in a life cycle. Or as the old priests used to say, hatch 'em, match 'em, and dispatch 'em. The creation of birds is one of those few topics where the Bible and the biology textbook agree. Birds are the second born of creatures, after the monsters and before the mammals. In the first chapter of the biblical book of Genesis, verse 21, we read, God created the great sea monsters and every winged bird of every kind. So if sea monsters here mean dinosaurs and a day means a few million years, then yes, the dinosaurs actually did eventually turn into the birds. That's why a chicken is still shaped like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And if you've ever been around chickens, they don't know the change has happened. Then, after creating the animals and the insects and the worms, God makes humans and gives them dominion over all of these creatures, including the birds, most of whom still haven't received this message. Avian liberty is still celebrated today when concert goers feel confined by a long song and begin chanting, "Free bird." Yeah, I don't know. I just, it popped into my head. I was like, that one, that one. God created the birds in the Bible shortly after dividing the watery chaos into sky, land, and sea, and the birds would have their next biblical moment in the flood story, when God has recombined the sky, land, and sea back into a watery chaos. Noah and his family survive on the ark, preserving animals two by two, including the birds, and then the dove brings back the olive branch. Actually, things get a little bit confusing here. Because first, the Bible tells us that Noah sends out the raven, and it never returns. Then he sends the dove 3 times. Once it comes back empty-beaked, then with the branch, and from its 3rd trip, it doesn't come back at all. So if the creatures came in pairs, it's unclear how the species of the raven and dove continue with the original mating pair having been separated. Rabbis have obsessed over this inconsistency for centuries. And the best explanation that they have devised is that when Noah commanded the raven to search for land, the bird suspected that the old man was sending him on a hopeless suicide mission to get him out of the way so that Noah could steal his raven bride. And never mind here that Noah was 600 years old at the time. And when the raven finally agreed to go, he got distracted by floating cadavers and never came back. Oddly, even this rabbinic legend does not explain how the raven's mate later produced offspring. So maybe it was Noah after all. Ravens make their next big appearance centuries later when the prophet Elijah is hiding out from the wicked queen Jezebel, and God commands him to wait out a drought and commands the ravens to bring him daily bread and meat. What this meat was, the Bible does not say. But if it's something the ravens were pecking, it probably wasn't kosher. In Judaism, you still leave out a plate for Elijah during Passover, but presumably not roadkill. How the birds got this bread is an even greater mystery, since Jesus so famously said, "Consider the ravens who neither sow nor reap, who have no storehouses or barns." So if the ravens couldn't produce this bread, it may have been stolen. Or maybe this is one of those manna from heaven things. Jesus said the ravens don't farm and yet God feeds them. And of how much more value are you than the birds? This is a pretty bold statement that God loves people so much more than birds. But it comes from Jesus' cultural upbringing. One of the details that usually gets left out of the Christmas pageant is in Luke's gospel. After the scene with the shepherds, Mary and Joseph bring baby Jesus to the temple. And we read, when the time came for the purification according to the law of Moses, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him, and they offered a sacrifice according to what is stated in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or two young pigeons. This pair of birds that was sacrificed in the temple after the birth of Jesus was actually the discount sacrifice for people who couldn't afford a lamb. Now, according to the gospel, Jesus had at least 7 siblings, 5 brothers and 2 sisters. And when you add it up, that means that Mary had to go to the temple 8 times and sacrifice 16 birds. And I have to wonder how the birds would have felt about this. Like God cursed women because of Eve eating the fruit. But the curse falls double on the turtle doves. Where is the divine justice in that? This rampant slaughter of turtle doves makes it all the more miraculous that the Holy Ghost descended in the form of a dove at the Annunciation. It's amazing that no one grabbed it to sell at the temple. Jesus did apparently have mixed feelings about all this. When he attacked the temple and the merchants with a bullwhip, he smashed the bird cages, releasing the doves that were being held there for sacrifice. The story takes yet another twist in the Acts of the Apostles when Jesus is gone and Peter was trying to decide what to eat. And God sent a vision of a sheet full of animals with lizards and birds, commanding that the hard-headed disciple kill and eat them. And Peter argued that some of them were ritually unclean, but God castigated him for being so judgmental. Unclean birds at the time were owls, ravens, vultures, and storks. And God declared open season on them. So ravens became food, and thank goodness at least one stork survived, or else Christian doctrine would have no explanation of where babies come from, except for some bizarre collaboration of birds and bees. And I was researching birds in the Bible. I thought it was going to be so gentle. It was such a mess. The Haida tribe, who live on an island off British Columbia, tell of a raven who lived in the earliest days of creation, when the universe was dark. And he bumbled around, looking for girls to flirt with, and pranks to play, and food to steal, but he kept bumping into things in this darkness. He heard of a house where an old man lived with his adult daughter. And somewhere in this house was a box containing something mysterious and wonderful. This got his attention. A family with hidden wealth was perfect for a prank. So he found the house, but it was too dark for him to find the door. He got an idea. He shrunk himself down really, really small, turned himself into a hemlock needle, and waded in the river. When the woman drew water and drank it, she swallowed the needle, and the raven transformed into a baby in her belly so that he could get inside of the house. And he was born in there, and as a little boy, he tricked the old man into opening the box, and inside of it was light, all of the light in the universe. So resuming his raven form, he picked up the ball of light in his beak and he flew off, but he accidentally dropped the ball and it shattered, and the pieces hit the ground and bounced into the sky, becoming the sun and the stars. The raven was a trickster. He did this for his own selfish amusement. But from this prank, light came into the world. Many indigenous cultures have these raven trickster comedy stories. The raven is a scavenger who lets other animals do the work of hunting and then shows up to eat when they're gone. The raven is also a messenger between the living world and the spirit world, a reminder of mortality. So maybe it's best for people to believe that he has a dark sense of humor. In the Haudenosaunee creation story, the Iroquois creation, A pregnant woman is falling from the sky toward a dark world of water, and the circling birds spot her, knowing that with nowhere to land, she will sink and be gone. They discuss this and they vote. And they discuss it and they vote again. And they discuss it and they keep doing this while she's falling. They keep doing this until they reach a consensus. And they all agree that they will circle and use their wings to slow her fall, and they will summon a turtle to raise her shell to the surface, saving the Sky Woman's life. In Iroquois storytelling, this is the first instance of democracy, and the humans inherit this wisdom from the birds. In Midwestern Lakota culture, the world is made up of two-legged peoples, humans, the four-legged peoples, the animals, the standing peoples, the plants, and the winged peoples, the birds. All are citizens in the community of life, each with spirit and spiritual responsibility. In this belief system, the bird dances its prayer by flying and sings its prayers in song. And when humans perform important and challenging dances, they'll blow on an eagle bone whistle to translate their pain into bird song. Well, it's winter in western New York. The birds have flown down to Florida, taking their songs with them. The only music in the air is the howling wind nipping at your ears. They will be back in spring to fill the sky with their beautiful, lewd music. We may think birdsong is pretty, but that's just a coincidence. Any CD of it should have a parental advisory sticker or an explicit content warning. You know that birds only sing one thing. It is what we humans call sexual harassment. I wonder if blue jays hear construction workers wolf whistling and catcalling at lady joggers and say, "Those humans sure can make beautiful music." I think that's how they learned to fly, was to get away in a hurry after tweeting obscenities. If the sparrows were here in winter, they would be laughing at us, not just because we're too dumb to migrate, mostly because when there's ice on the sidewalk and a person slips, they'll flap their arms like wings. It's an instinctive thing. You can't help it. I did it last winter. I was slipping on the ice, and my arms started flapping like wings. And I actually did manage to flap hard enough to keep myself upright. And then I looked around, not to see if I had won a karate contest with my crane kick, but because I wondered if there were any birds on wires laughing like drunks in midnight choirs. Maybe someday I'll get to see someone slip on the ice, flap like crazy, achieve liftoff, and fly down to Florida. When you get there, look out for the alligators. The rest of us can await the return of our fine feathered friends while contemplating age-old mysteries, like which came first, the chicken or the egg? How is a raven like a writing desk? And why did the chicken cross the road? Thank you.